Hello and welcome to Lesson 6 of Changing Cities. We're going to start this session by looking at three dingbats which introduce some of the key terms you're going to be faced with in this session. So we'll do that straight away. Here we go, here's the first one. Okay, this one is inequality. The next one. This one is deprivation. And the final key term, this one is quality of life. Okay, so you may have a vague idea about what some of these terms mean, but if you don't worry, we're going to cover them in this session. So here's your title, please write this down. It's Inequality in Norwich. So we're going to look at the concept of what we mean by inequality to begin with. We're also going to look at this thing called deprivation, what we mean by deprivation and how we measure it, and therefore the impact of it on quality of life. Again, specifically looking at Norwich. I've got some great stats which are really going to help you visualise just what we mean by inequality in Norwich and actually just how unequal the quality of life for people of Norwich can be. So you've got two images that illustrate this point straight away. And the quality of housing on the left there is a proposed flat development in the Thorpe Hamlet ward of Norwich in the inner city, redeveloped area, modern looking flats that are really designed to attract wealthy young professionals. And then you've got in the suburbs, the social housing of Mile Cross ward in the sort of the north of the city. So again, you can see a very clear difference. So obviously, I haven't taken that picture, that house looking its best. It's clearly just had a house fire. But what you can see is a stark difference between just the image of the buildings alone. So now you've got your title. We're just going to start by trying to get a definition of what we mean by inequality. And so what I'd like you to do is I want you to use these 5 bullet points to come up with your own definition of what you think is meant by the term inequality. So I'm going to ask you to pause the screen now, and then I'll reveal something which you may have written down in front of you. There isn't a definition in the glossary for the specification, but essentially it involves these 5 kind of ideas in some guise. So what I'd like you to do is try and figure out your own definition, and then I'll give you a suggestion after you unpause the screen. Okay, so how I would define inequality is the difference in opportunity or level of disadvantage between wealthy and deprived areas and how they're unevenly spread across a city or a town. So, for example, in Norwich, there are parts of Norwich where there is greater deprivation, they are more deprived, and as a result they have less opportunity and more disadvantage. Whereas the wealthy areas of Norwich have greater opportunity and fewer disadvantages, and there is quite an uneven spread of this opportunity around the city. And Norwich is a really good example, and like I said, I've got some great stats for you to demonstrate this point. So once you've got your own definition written down based on what I've just said, we're just going to get some idea about what causes inequality in general in Norwich. So you're going to be creating a mind map from these images. Okay, I will talk you through each of these different factors, and what I'd also like you to do, or expect you to do really, is write a few notes around some of the factors from what I kind of commentate over them with. So we'll start on the top left, and that image represents poor quality housing. So if you have housing which is poor quality, what we mean by that is it's not necessarily very thermally efficient. It probably is quite cold. It might not have double glazed windows, for example. It might have a leaky roof. It might not be in a very good state of repair. So the poorer the quality of the housing, the less likely it is you're going to have a home that is warm and watertight, and therefore you have an increasing chance of becoming unwell, and that might lead you to having time off school or time away from work, which could increase your inequality. Whereas if you live in a very good quality house, or something which is very thermally efficient, it's a modern house, it might cost a bit more, but if you can afford that, what it does is it allows you to have conditions that are more consistent and more stable. You're not going to have to go to bed wearing your coat and things like that, and you're less likely to miss time from school from being unwell. So that's one way in which poor quality housing can create inequality in a city. So another aspect that creates inequality is high unemployment. If you've got areas where people do not have jobs, they don't earn money, or they're on the basic wage, or the dole they call it. So they sign on to the council and they get job seekers allowance. Now, job seekers allowance is not just lazy people getting money for nothing. It is a very small amount of money to survive on. And there are some people that may exploit the system, but realistically, you are better off getting a job because you will get paid better than if you are just getting money from the government. Now, that money means that it has to be spent on the very, very bare essentials of food, water, and keeping a roof over your head. And even then, it's not always enough to do so. So the food you buy might not necessarily be the most nutritious. And it might be just something to fill you up quite cheaply. So a really good example, and there's expression about this food being cheap, is chips. Cheap as chips. So chips are not massively beneficial in terms of your health. They don't provide you a lot of nutrients, but they do fill you up, and they are relatively cheap. A large portion of chips will cost you a couple of quid. Whereas if you want to have a nice plate of lovely nutritious vegetables, or good quality meat or fish, or all the other things that go into a well balanced nutritious diet, that will keep you healthier. Obviously, you're paying more than £2 a person to do that, and so unemployment can have knock-on effects to health because of what you can afford to buy. You may not have enough money to heat your home as well as you might. So we've talked about this poor quality housing and lack of heating. If you can't afford to heat your home because you're on very little money, then again that has the knock-on effects of being unwell, not being able to get over illness as easily. So that's another factor. And also, you spend time trying to find employment. You have less time to do other things like maybe look after your mental health, or go for a run, and look after your physical health. So again, that leads to inequality. So a third factor is air quality. If you happen to live in a part of the city, or in the inner city where there is greater number of cars, there's going to be more air pollution, and that can again affect your health massively. And health is one of the biggest factors that we talk about here. If you've got poor air quality and your health is low, again, you miss school, you miss work, and it's not as good for you in terms of your future prospects if you're ill all the time. Another factor is overstretched schools. So again, if you're in an area where there is maybe cheaper housing, which is more affordable or lower cost, it will attract people on lower incomes. And a lot of the people that are on lower incomes in those areas are migrant workers. So migrants will come to the UK to seek employment, and they don't often start with a big load of money, and that's why they're coming to seek employment, to make more than they've got. So they tend to focus on the areas of housing which are lower cost. Now, if they have children, or they've got children with them, or they have children while they're working in those areas, what they will then do is those children will go to the local school, and because that local school is now catering for children that don't necessarily have the same level of support at home with regards to reading and writing, the school have to employ learning support assistants or teaching assistants to really help support those children as well as they can in terms of catching up, and because it's more difficult for those children to learn if at home they're not got the same input. Now, that happens again largely in inner city areas, and what it does mean is that the school is then stretched. It's overstretched with regards to resources it's got, and that can lead to again an overall lower standard of education, or it might just mean that some people move their children somewhere else that can afford to do that, and it creates a bit of a divide between the results and how well schools do. And then the final point I've put on here is if you've got a lack of green space or a lack of recreation, things to do, or again, you can't afford to do those things. So there are parts of Norwich, for example, where you can go and play tennis, or you can go to a gym. But you would notice in Norwich that most of those areas, for example, Norwich Tennis Club is in a part of the city which the housing around it is very, very plush, very large, detached properties with massive gardens, very quiet areas, and it is also near schools that are generally thought of as slightly higher regarded parts of the city. Now, not always, but it does also mean that if you've got a lack of green space to kick a ball around, or a lack of recreation opportunities like basketball courts or whatever, then you may have again knock-on effects to your health. It might lead to high crime rates and criminal records, and again all of those things add up to have a big knock-on effect to your level of equality and your quality of life. So all of these aspects, housing, air quality, schools, unemployment, lack of green space, all really are things that just add into the melting pot of creating inequality in a city. if you've got fewer of these things affecting you, you are going to have less inequality. You're going to have, well, you still have inequality, but you'll be the right end of it. You'll be the end of it that has the advantages and has the opportunities, and you're likely to be someone that's probably earning a bit more. So that really summarises some of the causes of inequality in cities just like Norwich, and this is happening around all developed countries. Okay, now this is a task which I hope you're familiar with. This is using the website of the UK censusdata.com, and I have checked this, and I'll show you by clicking on the link that it does still work just about, and hopefully they don't get rid of it before you have a chance to complete this task. But this is a comparison for Eton Ward and Mancroft Ward in Norwich. So what I'd like you to do is actually use census data, proper census data, to try and identify inequality within the city of Norwich. So I've chosen those two wards specifically because I know that there is inequality between those two cities, and I've got one stat that I can start you off with. I am considering putting a completed version of this table on 365 for you to use if you do struggle or the link breaks down, but really it's better if you've got the opportunity to click on the link and use it so you can start to navigate and utilise census data sort of independently, really, and improve your independent skills. So the one stat I've provided you now is that 16% of people in Eton Ward have no qualifications, whereas 24% of people in the Mancroft Ward, which is in the city of Norwich, have no qualifications. So there is a big disparity there. You know, nearly 1 in 4 people that live in the Mancroft Ward have no qualifications, no formal qualifications, no GCSEs, no A-levels, no degree, nothing. Whereas it's only 16% of people in the Eton Ward. And now, all the people that live there in the census will include children. So people that are under the age of 16 are unlikely to have any qualifications because unless they did it early, they won't have done their GCSEs. So this not only suggests that this accounts for the population either being very young, but I doubt 1 in 4 of the population of Mancroft are children or people under 16 years old. This tells us that there's probably quite a large proportion of the adult population in there that do not have any formal qualifications, or they don't have recognised qualifications in the UK, so they may be migrant workers, for example. So this demonstrates, in terms of education, inequality in those areas. These people that go to Mancroft Ward are clearly less educated, in inverted commas, than the people of Eton Ward, which is slightly on the outskirts, is in the suburban region, and it's a bit more well-to-do. So I will show you this link, and what I'd like you to do is obviously choose your own characteristics from this link, but try and get a range. So I've covered education here. I'm going to show you some of the aspects that you could also include, so hopefully this doesn't break my video. So I'm going to click on that. Okay, and this should take me to, there you go, the UK Census Data page, and our two areas that we're looking at, there's Norwich, okay, with two areas we're looking at are Eton and Mancroft. So if I click on Eton, it'll take me to the Eton Ward, and don't worry about these little bits and bobs here. What I need to do, okay, is scroll down, okay, and make sure you're paying attention. You've got some key stats here. How many people live there? Just under 9,000. The number of households are, so this is the number of houses. Average number of people per household, so there's only 2.2 people on average living in each home. That's basically this number divided by this number. And people in communal living, etc., etc. So that's kind of the basic stuff, but what you really want to do is use this list here. Now this is pretty comprehensive. You can see just how much stuff is included on this list, and what you're doing really is trying to look at stuff which tells you about inequality. So some of this might not be particularly relevant, okay? It might not matter, for example, your country of birth or your adult life stage, for example, but what might matter is your general health. So for example, we've identified education statistics, but general health statistics might be something you click on, and what you can do here is you can look for, it's clicked down, go away, there we go, we're back. The general health stats for this thing, for Eton Ward, which remember is our slightly less deprived in terms of wealth area, shows you that these are all the people, so 8,781, that represents everybody in that ward, and 4,000, just over 4,000, more, nearly half are in what's called very good health. 3,000 are in good health. 1,000 are in fair health, and you've only actually got 71 people in very bad health. That's the stat I'd probably pick. Okay, so in my table I would write number of people with very bad health, 71 in the Eton ward. Now if I go back, let's go to compare that to my Mancroft ward. So I'm going to find the same statistic here. Again, 9,000 people, slightly more, but close number. If I go back onto my general health and click on that, I can see, let's go down to my bottom stat, the number of people with very bad health is actually 183. Now you compare that to Eton, which was only 71. That's more than double. It's a huge number compared to it. Now the population of that area is a bit higher, so you may want to work out what proportion of 9,641 183 is, but I can guarantee you the percentage that in very bad health is higher by quite some way than in Eton ward. Okay, so that's what I really want you to do with regards to this website, and there's so many stats that you can look at that will tell you something about inequality. Okay, so have a little scroll through. That will take you quite a while to complete. So what I'd ask you to do is just make sure you come up with maybe 4 or 5 different statistics or different ways to show inequality between Eton and Mancroft wards. Okay, so I'll go back to my PowerPoint. I would like you to complete this. Make sure you've just got bullet point them is fine. Okay, but pause the screen while you are completing that, and when you are ready, you can unpause the screen. Okay, so hopefully you've got a good range of statistics, and remember, if you struggled, I sort of am fairly pledging that I'll put on 365 kind of a comparison table ready if you really struggled or the link was broken. So now we're going to move on to this term deprivation, and it's a term really that some of you may have heard of, and if someone is deprived, I'm sure most of you would probably jump to saying it means that they're poor. Okay, and that's normally what you associate with this idea of deprivation. If you are deprived of something, you are doing without, and often that's money. But really, we measure deprivation in loads of ways, and the best, most accurate way of measuring deprivation is using kind of more than one factor. So there are 7 factors that go into measuring deprivation in this category, this what's called the Index of Multiple Deprivation, or IMD. Now that combines those 7 different factors, and they each contribute a percentage to the overall score that's awarded for this. Okay, and that will tell you overall how deprived a place is. So the 7 things that this relates to, and I'd like you to write these down, please. The first one is to do with money, and that makes a big proportion of the amount that actually goes into it overall. So 22.5% of the score for the multiple deprivation score is based on income. How much money someone is paid. The higher the amount of money you're paid, the better your the less your deprivation score, I guess, will be. If your income is very low, it will give you a higher deprivation score. You are more deprived if you have less money. So that's one factor, income. Again, make sure you are noting these down. Second factor is employment deprivation. So this one is to do with jobs. Okay, the first one's to do with how much money you get, but this one is actually to do with your job type. So if you are part-time, or if you are full-time, or if it's low-skilled, high-skilled, that will depend on that's what we mean by employment deprivation. So people with the highest deprivation, the worst kind of employment deprivation levels, are ones that maybe have insecure, very part-time, very low-skilled jobs. Okay, there'll be maybe high labour-intensive jobs, something like that. Low-skilled jobs don't require an education necessarily to do them. Right, the third aspect is to do with your level of education, skills, and training. So again, if you have low qualifications, or you have no training, or you don't have an apprenticeship, or you don't have many skills, then you will be high up the deprivation list for your education, skills, and training deprivation score, and that contributes 13.5% to the final kind of score of multiple deprivation. The fourth aspect is your health, which we've already mentioned. So health, deprivation, and disability. Again, if you are in poor health or very poor health, you will have a high health deprivation score. So the worse your health, the higher your deprivation score. Number 5 is crime, and that incorporates adds slightly less to the overall score, because even people on higher incomes, and often people on higher incomes, can actually be subject to more crime. But statistically speaking, crime actually is greater in places that are more deprived. They're, less wealthy areas. They don't have security. They don't have gates. They don't have alarms. That sort of thing. So your crime, the higher the crime rate, the higher your deprivation score. Number 6, barriers to housing and services. So again, the greater your number of barriers to adequate housing or public services, again, the worse your deprivation score will be. And then the final aspect, which contributes 9.3% as well, is the living environment deprivation. Now, this means the actual environment that you live in, or your surroundings. So, is there any green space there? Is there lots of stuff to do? Is it somewhere where the only thing you've got to do is like smash bus shelter windows open or something? Okay, again, the least activities, the less recreation, the less green space, the higher your living environment deprivation score will be. So look, you can see all of these aspects cover quite a lot, and I know I've made you write them down, and I'm yabbering away, so please pause the screen to get all the notes down. But look, it covers your money coming in, your type of job, your education level, your health, how much crime you're subjected to, how easy it is to get good housing and services, and what your kind of area is like in terms of as it being a nice place to be. And all of these 7 factors really combine to give you an overall score of how deprived you are. So you could score really highly on all of these, but if you live in like a concrete bunker filled with blooming toxic waste, then you're going to have less advantage than others, and so you will have a slightly higher deprivation score because of it. But every one of these adds together. If you've got deprivation in all counts of this, then you really are living in in the really unfortunate circumstance with less advantage and less opportunity than most other people you would encounter. Okay, so now we know what we mean by deprivation and what contributes to multiple deprivation. I've got some stats for you with regards to Norwich, which some of them might shock you a little bit. The first one I'm going to take you through is about health. So male life expectancy. Now, what you've got here is 2 lines. You've got a dotted line here at the top, and you've got a solid line here at the bottom. These lines represent 2 things. The dotted line represents in Norwich in 2013 and 15, so within the last 5 to 10 years, that is the place in Norwich that has the best index of multiple deprivation score. So this place represents the place that has the lowest deprivation. Okay, the wealthiest parts with the nicest houses, the best income, best education level, best recreational green space, lowest crime, whatever. And this one represents the places that have the worst or the highest index of multiple deprivation score. So this is where your housing quality is poor, you are low income or unemployed, you've got less green space, high crime rates, etc. Now, what this shows us is that if you live in the worst areas of Norwich, your life expectancy, your average age to live, is actually incredibly different. Just over 77 years old for someone in the worst areas of Norwich, and just over 80 years old for the best. So actually, there's nearly 5 years, so it's 4 years and it says 12 months, but essentially it's 5 years difference in terms of how long you'll expect to live, just based on the area of Norwich that you live in. And that, in a nutshell, is massive inequality. Huge inequality in terms of your how long you will live for. People who grow up in the wealthy areas of Norwich that have all the opportunity, all that access to services, etc., good nutritious food, will live 5 years longer on average. Now, these red blocks are not really worth talking about too much, but it does just show you which things cause the deaths and did cause the deaths during that time. So again, this is all taken from the census, and it shows you that one of the biggest causes of deaths and contributors to deaths was the circulatory system. So your blood vessels and heart attacks, basically. External factors could be all sorts of things. It could be getting hit by a car, or getting stabbed or shot or whatever, which again is quite high for this area. But you can see just that's not really as relevant. The key thing here is the difference between these two areas of Norwich. And what you can actually see, this dotted line, also this dashed line, the red dashed line in the middle, that is your England's average life expectancy. So if you live in a wealthy part of Norwich, you live on average more than the average life expectancy of someone else in England. Whereas if you live in the worst parts of Norwich, your life expectancy is far lower than just the average Brit. Okay, now that's for male life expectancy in Norwich. Now this one is for female life expectancy in Norwich, and this one is not quite as high, but it's still over 4 years, which is incredible. Again, so you've got the dotted line, this is the most wealthy areas at the top, and then your most deprived areas at the bottom through those 7 different factors or 7 different categories of deprivation. And again, your average life expectancy in England here. So again, 4 years and 2 months difference between the most deprived and the least deprived areas of Norwich. Now this one's again a slightly different one. This is your life expectancy at birth. So the stats that you saw on the last one were people currently. So this is kind of right now. This is stats that they gathered from data, death certificates, etc. This one is for males again. It divides up into males and females. This shows you for any baby born in deprived areas. Okay, for any baby born in certain deprived areas, along the bottom is where we'll count that. I'll explain that in a minute. Essentially, the baseline is, the stat is that those people that live in the least deprived areas, so the people with 100% conditions, so basically, the higher the percentage, the less deprived you are. So if you've got 0, you are in the most deprived areas, and if you've got 100%, you're in the least deprived areas. So the higher your kind of score, the better your situation, the better your life expectancy is. And this is actual data. These blue dots basically represent actual data that's collected, and this is the trend line. And the trend line shows you that for male babies born in Norwich, in the deprived areas, they will actually live nearly 10 years. It's 9.4 years difference. They will live 9.4 years less than any baby boys born in the least deprived areas. That is incredible. You know, that's nearly a decade of life that some people, just because they happen to be born in a deprived area, will miss out on. And that is inequality, massively. In a city like Norwich, that's how inequality works, really. It's just that level of disadvantage based on where they were born, effectively. Now, the females, again, it seems to be a trend. The female deprivation score affects them less, but it's still over 6 years, 6.3 years difference. Again, if you live in the most deprived parts of Norwich, you can expect to live about 80 years old, life expectancy if you're born, and if you are in the least deprived areas, you can expect to live on average around sort of 86 and a bit, and this again is the England average. So you can see big differences in life expectancy just based on where you live in Norwich. Okay, and that's with a city that isn't really very polluted, has lower crime rates than lots of others. Imagine the difference you would find in a city like Birmingham or London, or a bigger city with high pollution, higher crime, and far greater deprivation than we see in our city of Norwich. Okay, so that's just some statistics really to really prove and hammer home how inequality can affect different parts of the city, and how deprivation can lead to that inequality. So this map is a color-coded map, which is on a document I think I've saved on 365, which again is all about really life expectancy, and it shows you the red areas are where your life expectancy is lowest, and the green areas are where it's highest. And again, it's males, they divide up into males and females. So Mancroft Ward, you might be able to spot here, which is one from our table, is red, lower life expectancy than 77, and Eton is nice and green. So this again is another visual representation really of what we've already seen in our table of stats, that actually life expectancy in Mancroft Ward is lower than Eton Ward, and you can maybe add these stats to your table. Eton Ward has over 82 years on average life expectancy, whereas Mancroft has less than 77. So that's again a 5-year difference. So the next slide, again there you go, I've highlighted them for you there. The next slide is for your female life expectancy. So again, males and females, and again you can see the difference is a bit less in Mancroft to Eton. Okay, it's 82 to 83 and a half, whereas this is over 85. So again, it's still 3 to 5 years difference, big difference between the two areas. And again, this is a far more deprived area of the city than Eton is. Okay, now this one again shows the kind of overall deprivation scores of different parts of Norwich. So this is your index of multiple deprivation, where they've divided up. Again, the red means more deprived, green means least deprived, and again you can see that the difference between Mancroft and Eton wards is quite stark here. Eton clearly one of the wealthiest parts of the city, whereas Mancroft one of the most deprived parts of the city. And again, it might not be surprising to you that places like Bowthorpe, where you've got the Larkman estate, and Marlcross up here, where you've got the Marlcross estate, are also very deprived areas. So when you consider how deprived these areas are, and all those 7 things that go into giving it this score, it just shows you actually the people of Marlcross have actually got it rough. And the people of Lakenham, or the people, so Lakenham's down here, okay, and you've got Bowthorpe area here. Those areas really are starting out life a lot further behind maybe some of the people that live in the wealthier parts of Norwich. So it's really important just to compare that actually if those guys have made a success of themselves, they've actually had to get through a lot more difficulty and hardship than maybe someone that's done really well in Eton Ward. Okay, so if you wanted, by the way, you can obviously try and suggest reasons for these trends, but again, I think everything we've outlined today really kind of explains why that's going on. So we're kind of getting near the end of this session now, and it's been another long one, but it's definitely worthwhile you kind of identifying this. And I think this one really shows a lot of stuff that maybe you wouldn't have known about Norwich prior to this session. So what we want to try and do is link inequality, which we established at the start, and deprivation, which we've just looked at, with economic change. And how do these things all link together? So when we talk about economic change, we really mean how the wealth of the city changes, and what happens when deindustrialization occurs and people lose jobs, etc. Or when retail changes in the city. So economic change, what that can do is bring deprivation to some parts of Norwich. Let's say a factory closes down. What happens? What's the impact of that factory? Well, the people that worked in it, that are low-skilled labourers, no longer have a job, and if they are low-skilled, chances of them getting a new job in the computing industry or finance are slim. So that will increase unemployment, and the knock-on effect of that is lower income, and again we know that that's one of the key deprivation factors. The factories are often placed next to areas of low-quality housing, so again the housing quality is not improving, and again that's another factor that leads to inequality, and it's another deprivation statistic. So you've got how economic change can bring deprivation to parts of Norwich, but it also brings prosperity to other parts, and regeneration, redevelopment can mean that some wealthier parts, or some places that are maybe more deprived, become wealthier parts, and that's certainly something which is looking like it might happen in the Anglis Square, kind of Magdalen Street area of Norwich. Now what I've got for you here is just a way to kind of just practice extending your answers, and I've done one of them for you to demonstrate how it works, but these are sort of starter points which I'd like you to try and extend to explain how they create inequality for Norwich. So again, bear in mind what we mean by inequality: difference in opportunity, advantages in terms of like success, and again wealth, etc. So this is one I've done for you to show how it works. Because of economic change, there are fewer factories. Deindustrialization, I mentioned this one. So jobs for locals in central areas are less, and that means they have to travel further to work, and it costs them more. So because they've got more money being spent on how they get to work, they've got maybe less money for other basics. So I've actually gone further than saying, they're going to be out of work and they're low skilled, so they're just going to be unemployed. I've actually said, I've assumed this person's got another job, but they have to travel further to get there, so they are running out on money. They're at a disadvantage because more of their money is being spent on travel. So the other 4 points I've got on here, what I'd like you to do is decide how it affects and creates inequality. Remember, inequality can be areas getting wealthier or poorer. It's the divide between those areas that's important. Okay, so what I'd like you to do is try and extend those answers, and with that you'll have 4 really detailed extended points linking economic change, and the points I've started are economic change. So growth of finance, that's economic change. Incoming economic migrants, economic change. investment in older inner city areas, redevelopment, is economic change. So all of those things are economic change. I've done that bit for you. You just have to link those things to deprivation and inequality. Okay, so pause the screen while you do that. That really will be a pretty much comprehensive set of notes for this entire session. There's a lot of difficult concepts to maybe understand here, so please feel free to get in touch with me and email if there's anything you're not quite sure about. But just to finish off, I've got a little bit of a mindless activity for you, but just to help you with some of the key terms and some of the reasons for inequality and quality of life. You may know what you think quality of life means already, but there's a definition on there for you already in bold and italics. They mention quality of life, and they do give you a definition of this in the glossary. So it's the level of well-being, physical and mental well-being, felt by a group of people or a person in a place. This can relate to jobs, wages, food, access to quality public services, blah, blah, blah. So there's loads of stuff that really sounds quite familiar with regards to deprivation and inequality. But how is quality of life different from deprivation and inequality, or is it? What I'd like you to do is just consider that. But essentially, if you are talking about inequality, it's the knock-on effect that inequality and deprivation has on your quality of life. Okay? So what I really want you to get out at this point is, just because you are maybe on a lower income and you live in a house that's not as good quality, does it mean that your level of physical and mental well-being is going to definitely be worse or better? Does money make you happy? That's really a question that's quite a wide question, really. But I just want you to consider that point, really, for your just more rounded kind of viewpoint with regards to this concept. Okay, so just to talk about quality of life, I'm almost embarrassed to give you this activity. There's a word search on 365. Word searches, who remembers those? So there's a word search which has different factors which affect quality of life, which aren't necessarily included in our deprivation or inequality statistics. So these factors can just as much affect your quality of life, which aren't necessarily included in deprivation and inequality. So complete the word search just to find out, and the pictures here should hopefully help you a little bit as well. And then when you've done that, you have got this full set of notes for this session. I'm just going to finish off the lesson with a couple of right, wrong, impossibles. Okay, so when you complete the word search, you can please feel free to carry on.